Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tianyu. Coming up in this edition, U.S. President Joe Biden has pressed for a Gaza ceasefire deal during talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, while Hamas has condemned the Israeli leader's speech at the U.S. Congress. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the extreme summer heat across several regions this year has been worrying. And Typhoon Gaemi has made landfall in the Chinese mainland, pummeling the southeast coast with high winds and heavy rain. We begin in North America. U.S. President Joe Biden has pressed for a Gaza ceasefire deal during talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. Netanyahu also met U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. Nick Hopper has more.
Well, the White House described as a very important day those meetings between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden. In the Oval Office earlier, we heard Netanyahu strike a very personal note and tone with President Biden. Obviously, Biden now with just 6 months left to run on his presidency.
Mr. President, we've known each other for 40 years, and you've known every Israeli Prime Minister for 50 years, from Golda Meir. So from a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the State of Israel. And I look forward to discussing with you today and working with you in the months ahead on the great issues before us.
The main focus of the meetings was all about this ceasefire deal that has not yet been agreed and really trying to push to get the hostages released, another thing that has not yet been secured. During those private meetings, there was some thinking that Joe Biden would try and push harder, perhaps harder than he has in the past, to try and ensure that there is that ceasefire deal, but also to take Netanyahu to task on his use of heavy military weaponry, including large bombs in civilian areas. But of course, it's not the only meeting that's taken place. He also met with Vice President Kamala Harris, who is, of course, also the presumptive Democratic Party nominee. Harris, we are told in the past, has said that she would continue, if president, that unwavering ironclad support for Israel. But there is some thinking that she might include more of a humanitarian stance, urging more support for Palestinian civilians. After these meetings in Washington, Netanyahu is travelling to Florida on Friday to Mar-a-Lago to meet Donald Trump, the Republican Party nominee. So hedging his bets, whoever wins in November, he has maintained that personal relationship. Remember, the two leaders, Trump and Netanyahu, had something of a closer relationship during Trump's time in power than we've seen between Netanyahu and Biden, that warmer personal relationship. And of course, Donald Trump has said that he would continue that unwavering support for Israel.
That was Nick Hopper on the Israeli Prime Minister's U.S. visit. In the Middle East, the Palestinian Commission of Detainee Affairs says a Hamas leader in the West Bank has died in Israeli custody. Hamas has condemned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech on Wednesday to the U.S. Congress, saying it's misleading the public. The number of casualties is climbing as the conflict continues in Han Yunis in the Gaza Strip. Akram Al-Satari has more.
Well, Hamas made a statement, and that statement was defying and refuting the words that were said by the Israeli Prime Minister in front of the Congress. They were saying that that speech was full of lies. That was number one. Number two, it said that Netanyahu was speaking in that language because he and the Israeli government realized that the situation and the dynamics in the United States are changing. And number three, they were highlighting the fact that the day after the war is going to be a purely Palestinian day, in the sense that they said the Palestinians are the ones who are going to decide whatever is going to happen, the way they are going to be governed. And the main things that are happening are the continuous strikes that have been non-stop in Khan Yunis. 21 people have been killed so far in all different parts of Khan Yunis. They have tens of thousands of people who are still trapped there. The exchange of fire is at a peak. The Palestinian resistance have been releasing a statement in which they were saying that they have successfully targeted either Merkaba 4 or D9, the one master piece of art that is used by the Israeli army. The Israelis have been from their side targeting Palestinians. 4 people from the electricity company in Gaza were killed in an airstrike. One person who works for an international organization was injured in an airstrike that targeted the truck that he was leading and that was driving and that was coordinated. 4 the people continue to fall injured or dead, and the situation continues to be extremely dire.
That was Akram Al-Satari in Gaza. Elsewhere in Asia, the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting has opened in the capital of Laos. The meeting reviewed the progress of community building in the Southeast Asian region and development of long-term plans until 2045. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks with his counterparts from Laos and 2 ASEAN guest countries, Russia and India. Ryan Mauser has more from Vientiane.
There's plenty of positives to emphasize when it comes to ASEAN-China relations and the trajectory of those relations. China has been ASEAN's #1 trading partner dating back to 2009, and during the pandemic, ASEAN overtook the EU to become China's #1 trading partner as well. We've also seen a huge surge in investment from China into the region, with it becoming the biggest foreign investor in many of the countries in the region since the advent of the Belt and Road Initiative. Particularly, many of the ASEAN countries are also closely intertwined with China's electronics supply chain, as well as supplying commodities such as agricultural products as well to China. And of course, China exports vast amounts of goods to this region as well. And Wang Yi emphasized the importance of China's EVs to the local market. Something like 67% of the electric vehicles that are sold in the ASEAN region are from China, and I've been very surprised to see here in the Laotian capital, Vientiane, so many Chinese electric vehicles driving around here in what is a lower middle income country. As well, China is, of course, exporting its know-how as well in things such as green technology as well. And the trajectory of trade and investment is only on the upswing as well because of the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with China and ASEAN as well. So plenty to look forward to further growth in these areas, and there's a lot of optimism that relationship at the strategic level, at the economic level as well, will continue to deepen and strengthen.
That was Ryan Mauser reporting on the growing relations between China and ASEAN. At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the extreme summer heat across several regions this year has been worrying. He's calling for urgent international cooperation to counter record-breaking temperatures. Jody Jacobs reports from the UN headquarters in New York.
In the words of Antonio Guterres, it's summertime, but the living is no longer easy. This rings true as many parts of the world have been experiencing record-breaking temperatures. Just this past Sunday, preliminary data suggests that it was the hottest day ever recorded by scientists. Sounding the alarm bells yet again, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told reporters that Monday and Tuesday this week were also the hottest days on record.
But let's face facts. Extreme temperatures are no longer a 1 day, 1 week or 1 month phenomenon. If there is one thing that unites our divided world, is that we are all increasingly feeling the heat. Earth is becoming hotter and more dangerous for everyone, everywhere. Billions of people are facing an extreme heat epidemic, wilting under increasingly deadly heat waves, with temperatures topping 50 degrees Celsius around the world. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit and halfway to boiling.
And halfway to boiling, we are here in New York. The National Weather Service says July 2024 could potentially be one of the city's hottest months on record. This worrying trend, the UN Secretary General says, must be stopped. On Thursday, Antonio Guterres launched what he calls the Secretary General's call to action on extreme heat. Its aim, an urgent and concerted effort to enhance international cooperation to address extreme heat. Guterres wants the vulnerable around the world affected by heat to be taken care of, workers protected, and increase investment in renewable energy, and to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. He says the time has come for the international community to pull together.
I'm not frustrated. I'm determined to turn things around and to do everything I can for those that have the decision capacity to do so, to effectively turn things around. And we must recognize that a lot is being done. increase of renewable energy we are witnessing is the fastest increase of energy production by any means in history. We see electric cars multiplying in several countries. Many things are being done, but too little, too late. The problem is that climate change is running faster than all the measures that are now being put in place to fight it.
Scientists warn that while there might be a slow cooling down of the Earth later this year, the overall trend will persist, with Guterres urging world leaders to phase out fossil fuels fast to stop what he calls human-induced climate change.
That was Jody Jacobs at the UN. Extreme summer temperatures have been sweeping across many regions of our globe as climate change continues to make heat waves more frequent, intense, and lasting. Weather scientists in Europe say every month since June 2023 has become the planet's warmest since records began in 1940. Heat stress is increasingly affecting lives around the world. Alice Tiansen has more.
Dramatic time-lapse footage shows how the park fire started in Northern California on Wednesday, rapidly spread in a few hours, and burned through roughly 18,000 hectares overnight. That's more than 45,000 acres. One of dozens of active fires across the country. The neighboring state of Oregon is currently fighting the largest blaze in the U.S., and with others burning across the border in Canada, skies are filled with hazardous smoke and haze. Across the Atlantic, the Mediterranean region is facing a similar fate. Italy's latest fire in the San Felice Bay forced more than 500 tourists to evacuate, while 5 aircrafts were deployed to contain the flames. In the Spanish community of Andalusia, at least 170 firefighters have been working around the clock to battle 5 separate fires. And the nation's latest blaze erupted on Wednesday in Spain's Aragon province.
It's very scary and it makes me very sad because this is a beautiful place to be in and just enjoy the mountains. It must have been an accident, but it's still sad.
It's part of a global trend of extreme heat waves that's gripped much of the northern hemisphere, as the world broke a record this week for the hottest day on average on 2 consecutive days. In Morocco, at least 21 people died amid scorching heat in a 24-hour period. It comes at a time when the country also faces food insecurity due to drought.
Lately, Morocco is suffering from the dire consequences of droughts and climate change, as well as from poor rainfall. Annually, Morocco devotes some 5 million hectares to cereals, but because of climate change, only around 2.7 million hectares were cultivated with cereals.
That was Alice Tiansen reporting on the recent heat waves affecting people around the world. Here in China, Typhoon Gaemi has been weakening as it has inland after making landfall on the Chinese mainland. The typhoon affected hundreds of thousands of locals in the southeastern province of Fujian after cutting a deadly swathe through the northern Philippines and the Taiwan region. Disaster relief is underway. Guo Yan reports from Fuqing in Fujian province.
The workers of a local power electric company of the state grid are going all out to do some repairman work. They are trying to replace a transformer which was damaged by the typhoon. And for the moment, all the electricity and power supply in urban areas are almost all recovered. The Fujian province has downgraded their emergency response to the typhoon, but they still remain the highest alert for any weather disasters, including flooding, and they told all the relevant departments should keep vigilant to possible weather disasters or any geological disasters like landslide.
That was Guo Yan in Fujian on the latest from Typhoon Gaemi. Recapping today's headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden has pressed for a Gaza ceasefire deal during talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, while Hamas has condemned the Israeli leader's speech at the U.S. Congress. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the extreme summer heat across several regions this year has been worrying. And Typhoon Gaemi has made landfall in the Chinese mainland, pummeling the southeast coast with high winds and heavy rain. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianyu. Thank you for listening.